Marcus Thompson adjusted his crisp white collar one final time before stepping out of his modest apartment. The morning sun caught the pristine fabric of his white button-down shirt, making it almost glow against his dark skin. At 28 years old, Marcus had developed a peculiar habit that puzzled everyone who knew him. He wore nothing but white clothing every single day. His neighbors in the downtown Chicago apartment complex had grown accustomed to seeing him emerge each morning dressed entirely in white. White shirt, white pants, white shoes, even white socks. The elderly Mrs. Rodriguez from apartment 3B would wave from her window, always wondering about the young man who looked like he was perpetually heading to a job interview or a church service. Marcus worked as a data analyst for a mid-sized insurance company, a job that paid the bills but hardly satisfied his deeper longings. His colleagues at Sterling Insurance had nicknamed him White Lightning due to his clothing choices and his quick wit during meetings. While some found his wardrobe odd, most people simply accepted it as Marcus being Marcus. He was reliable, kind, and exceptionally good at his job, which mattered more than his fashion choices. The truth behind Marcus's white clothing was something he had never shared with anyone. 3 years earlier, his younger sister Amelia had been diagnosed with leukemia at the age of 19. During her treatment, she had spent countless days in the stark white hospital rooms, surrounded by white sheets, white walls, and medical professionals in white coats. One particularly difficult day, when her spirits were at their lowest, she had grabbed Marcus's hand weakly and whispered, "I wish I could see some color that means hope, not just all this medical white that makes me feel like I'm disappearing." That comment had haunted Marcus for weeks. He began researching the psychology of colors, learning that white often represented purity, new beginnings, and in many cultures, hope and healing. He decided that day to wear white every day until his sister recovered, turning the color from something that represented sterile hospital environments into something that symbolized his unwavering faith in her healing. Amelia had gone into remission after 18 months of treatment, but Marcus continued wearing white. It had become more than just a promise to his sister. It had become his identity, his way of carrying hope into the world. He believed that small acts of consistency and faith could create ripples of positive change, even if others couldn't see the meaning behind his actions. On this particular Tuesday morning in September, Marcus was running slightly late for work. He had spent extra time that morning ironing his white shirt to perfection and polishing his white leather shoes until they gleamed. As he hurried down the busy street toward the subway station, he noticed a small crowd gathered around something on the sidewalk. His natural curiosity and inherent desire to help others drew him toward the commotion. In the center of the crowd lay an elderly man, probably in his 70s, who had apparently collapsed while walking his small terrier dog. The man was conscious but clearly in distress, clutching his chest and breathing heavily. His dog, a little brown and white Jack Russell Terrier, was whimpering and staying close to his owner, sensing something was wrong. Several people stood around looking concerned, but no one seemed to know what to do. Someone had called 911, but the ambulance hadn't arrived yet. Marcus pushed through the small crowd and knelt beside the man, his white pants immediately touching the dirty sidewalk. He didn't hesitate or worry about staining his carefully maintained clothing. "Sir, can you hear me?" Marcus asked gently, placing a reassuring hand on the man's shoulder. The elderly gentleman's eyes focused on Marcus, taking in his all-white appearance. "Are you having chest pain?" The man nodded weakly. "My heart," he whispered. "Feels like an elephant sitting on my chest." His breathing was shallow and labored, and small beads of sweat covered his forehead despite the cool morning air. Marcus had taken a basic first aid course years earlier, though he had never imagined he would need to use it. He knew not to move someone who might be having a heart attack, but he could provide comfort and monitor the man's condition until professional help arrived. "What's your name, sir?" Marcus asked, trying to keep the man conscious and talking. "Harold," the man replied with effort. "Harold Cunningham. This is Buster," he added, glancing toward his worried dog. "I'm Marcus. Harold, the ambulance is on its way. Try to stay calm and breathe slowly. You're going to be okay." Marcus spoke with a confidence he didn't entirely feel, but he knew that panic would only make the situation worse. As they waited, Marcus noticed that Harold kept staring at his white clothing with a strange expression. Despite his obvious pain, there was something almost like recognition or wonder in the older man's eyes. "You look like an angel," Harold whispered, his voice barely audible above the street noise. "All in white like that. Maybe God sent you to help me." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. He had chosen to wear white as a symbol of hope and healing for his sister, never imagining that his appearance might bring comfort to a stranger in their moment of need. "I'm just a regular person, Harold, but I believe everything happens for a reason, and I'm glad I was here when you needed help." The sound of sirens grew louder as the ambulance approached. Marcus continued talking to Harold, asking about his dog and his family, anything to keep him conscious and calm. Harold mentioned that he was a widower who lived alone except for Buster, and that he had been on his way to the corner store to buy dog food when the chest pain suddenly struck. When the paramedics arrived, they quickly assessed Harold's condition and confirmed that he was indeed experiencing a heart attack. As they prepared him for transport to the hospital, Harold grabbed Marcus's hand with surprising strength. "Please," Harold said urgently, "can you take care of Buster? I don't have anyone else, and they won't let him come to the hospital." Marcus looked down at the small dog, who was now sitting quietly beside his master, brown eyes full of worry and confusion. Without hesitation, Marcus nodded. "Of course, Harold. Don't worry about Buster. Just focus on getting better." As the ambulance pulled away with Harold inside, Marcus found himself standing on the sidewalk holding the leash of a dog he had just met, his white clothes now bearing the stains of his good deed. Little did he know that this moment of compassion would set in motion a chain of events that would change not only his life, but the lives of countless others in ways he could never imagine. Marcus called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years, knowing that his supervisor would understand once he explained the situation. He spent the day at Chicago General Hospital, waiting for news about Harold while Buster sat patiently in the hospital parking lot inside Marcus's small Honda Civic. The hospital had a strict no-pets policy, but Marcus couldn't bear to leave the worried dog alone at home. Every few hours, Marcus would check on Buster, taking him for short walks around the hospital grounds and offering him water and some treats he had purchased from a nearby convenience store. The little terrier seemed to sense that his master was somewhere in the large building, occasionally whining and looking toward the hospital entrance with hopeful eyes. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the cardiologist treating Harold, finally emerged from the cardiac wing around 6 in the evening. She found Marcus sitting in the waiting room, his white shirt now wrinkled and bearing coffee stains from his long day of worry. "Are you Harold Cunningham's family?" Dr. Martinez asked, looking at her. "Clipboard." "Not exactly," Marcus replied, standing up. "I'm the person who helped him when he collapsed this morning. He asked me to take care of his dog, and I wanted to make sure he was okay." Dr. Martinez smiled warmly. "Mr. Cunningham has been asking about you all day. He had a significant heart attack, but we were able to perform an emergency angioplasty. He's stable now, though he'll need to stay here for at least a week for monitoring and recovery." Relief flooded through Marcus. "Can I see him?" Briefly, the doctor agreed. He's been quite insistent about speaking with the angel in white, who saved his life. When Marcus entered Harold's room, he found the elderly man connected to various monitors but alert and smiling. Harold's eyes lit up when he saw Marcus, taking in the stained white shirt and tired but kind face of the young man who had become his unexpected guardian angel. "Marcus!" Harold exclaimed, his voice stronger than it had been that morning. "How's my Buster? Is he okay?" "He's fine," Marcus assured him, pulling a chair close to the hospital bed. "He's been waiting in my car, worried about you. The nurses told me that pets aren't allowed inside, but he knows you're here somewhere." Harold's eyes filled with tears. "I can't thank you enough for what you've done. In all my 73 years, I've never met someone who would drop everything to help. A complete stranger the way you did." Marcus felt embarrassed by the praise. "Anyone would have done the same thing, Harold." "No," Harold said firmly, shaking his head. "Most people would have called 911 and walked away. You stayed. You comforted me. You took responsibility for Buster, without even knowing me. That's not ordinary kindness, son. That's something special." As they talked, Marcus learned more about Harold's life. He had been married to his beloved wife Eleanor for 47 years before she passed away from cancer 3 years earlier. They had never been able to have children, so when Eleanor died, Harold found himself truly alone for the first time in his adult life. Buster had been Eleanor's dog, and caring for the little terrier had given Harold a reason to get up each morning. "I've been pretty lonely since Eleanor died," Harold admitted. "Some days, the only conversation I have is with Buster. Today, when that pain hit my chest, I was so scared that Buster would end up in a shelter with no one to love him." Marcus felt a deep connection to this lonely man. After his sister's recovery, he had thrown himself into work and had gradually lost touch with many of his friends. His dedication to wearing white and his quiet personality had made him somewhat of an outsider, and he realized that he, too, had been lonely without fully acknowledging it. "Harold," Marcus said carefully, "what if I brought Buster to visit you every day while you're recovering? And maybe when you get out of the hospital, we could be friends. I live alone, too, and I think we could help each other." Harold's face transformed with joy and gratitude. "You would do that? But why? You don't even know me." Marcus thought about his sister, about the white clothes he wore as a symbol of hope, about the random chance that had placed him on that sidewalk at exactly the right moment. "Sometimes I think we meet people exactly when we need to meet them," he said simply. Over the following week, Marcus established a routine. Each morning before work, he would pick up Buster and drive to the hospital. While Harold wasn't allowed to see his dog inside the building, the nursing staff had arranged for a wheelchair so Harold could be taken to a patio area where Buster could visit. The daily reunions between Harold and Buster became a highlight, not just for them, but for the entire cardiac unit. Other patients, visitors, and staff members began to look forward to seeing the elderly man in his hospital gown sitting in the sunshine with his faithful terrier, while a young man in pristine white clothing sat nearby, quietly making sure both were comfortable. Nurse Patricia Williams, who had worked in the cardiac unit for 15 years, was particularly moved by the daily visits. "I've never seen anything like it," she told her colleague. "That young man shows up every single day, rain or shine, before work and again after work, just to make sure Harold gets to see his dog. He won't even take gas money when Harold offers it." During these visits, Marcus and Harold developed a genuine friendship. Harold shared stories of his life with Eleanor, his career as a high school history teacher, and his struggles with loneliness and purpose in his retirement. Marcus, in turn, opened up about his sister's illness, the meaning behind his white clothing, and his own feelings of isolation despite being surrounded by people every day. "You know," Harold said one afternoon as they sat on the hospital patio, "Eleanor always believed that people came into our lives for a reason. She used to say that kindness was like a stone thrown into a pond. It creates ripples that spread far beyond what we can see." Marcus was intrigued by this philosophy. "What do you think she would say about us meeting?" Harold smiled, gently petting Buster, who was curled up in his lap. "I think she would say that sometimes angels don't have wings and halos. Sometimes they just wear white clothes and show up exactly when they're needed most." As Harold's release date approached, Marcus began to worry about what would happen next. The older man was clearly much stronger and in good spirits, but he would be returning to an empty house and a solitary life. The daily hospital visits had given both of them structure and purpose, and Marcus didn't want to lose the friendship they had built. On Harold's last night in the hospital, Marcus stayed. Later than usual, they sat together in Harold's room, with Buster sleeping peacefully on a blanket beside the bed, technically against hospital rules, but overlooked by the compassionate nursing staff. "Marcus," Harold said quietly, "I need to tell you something. These past 2 weeks have been the happiest I've been since Eleanor died. Having someone to talk to, someone who cares, it's given me hope again." Marcus felt the same way, though he struggled to put it into words. "It's been good for me too, Harold. I didn't realize how lonely I had become." Harold reached into his bedside table and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. "Eleanor kept a journal," he said, handing it to Marcus. "The last entry she wrote was about kindness and how it has the power to change the world, one person at a time. I want you to have this." Marcus accepted the journal with trembling hands, feeling the weight of the gift and the trust Harold was placing in him. As he opened to Eleanor's final entry, he had no idea that the words he was about to read would inspire him to do something that would impact thousands of lives and turn his simple act of kindness into a movement that would spread across the entire city. Eleanor's final journal entry was written in shaky handwriting, but her words carried a power that made Marcus's hands tremble as he read them aloud to Harold in the quiet hospital room. "Today I watched a stranger help an elderly woman carry her groceries up 3 flights of stairs. He didn't know I was watching from my window. He didn't do it for recognition or praise. He simply saw someone who needed help and he helped her. I believe this is how we change the world, not through grand gestures or public announcements, but through quiet acts of kindness that ripple outward like waves in still water. If each person committed to one small act of kindness each day, we could transform our entire community. I pray that Harold will remember this after I'm gone. Kindness is contagious, and it costs nothing to spread." Marcus looked up to find Harold, wiping tears from his eyes. "She wrote this 2 days before she passed away," Harold whispered. "Even when she was dying, she was thinking about how to make the world better." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. Eleanor's words echoed in his mind, mixing with memories of Harold collapsed on the sidewalk, of Buster's worried eyes, of the nursing staff who had bent rules to allow their daily visits. He thought about his sister Amelia and how her illness had inspired his white clothing ritual. He realized that both Eleanor and Amelia had taught him the same fundamental truth. Small, consistent acts of love and kindness could create powerful change. By morning, Marcus had made a decision that would alter the course of his life forever. He started small. The day Harold was discharged from the hospital, Marcus didn't just take him home. He spent the entire weekend helping Harold organize his medications, stock his refrigerator with healthy food, and establish a routine for his recovery. But more importantly, he shared Eleanor's journal entry with Harold and proposed an idea that had been growing in his mind. "What if we started something in Eleanor's memory?" Marcus suggested as they sat in Harold's small living room, Buster contentedly sleeping between them on the couch. "What if we tried to create those ripples of kindness she wrote about?" Harold was immediately interested. "What did you have in mind?" Marcus pulled out a notebook where he had been sketching ideas. "I was thinking about starting small, maybe just in our neighborhood. What if we committed to doing one act of kindness for a stranger every day, and then we challenged others to do the same? We could call it the White Ripple Project." "White Ripple?" Harold asked. Marcus gestured to his white clothing. "White for hope, for new beginnings, for the color that brought us together. And ripple because of Eleanor's metaphor about kindness, spreading outward like waves." Harold's eyes lit up with enthusiasm he hadn't felt in years. "Eleanor would have loved this idea. How would we start?" They spent the next several hours planning. Marcus would continue his daily acts of kindness, but now he would be more intentional about it. He would carry small cards explaining the White Ripple Project and asking recipients to pass kindness forward. Harold, despite his recent heart attack, insisted on participating within the limits of his recovery. Their first official day of the White Ripple Project was a Tuesday, exactly 3 weeks after Harold's heart attack. Marcus began by buying coffee for the person behind him in line at his usual coffee shop, leaving a small white card that read, "This random act of kindness was inspired by Eleanor's belief that kindness ripples outward. Please pass it forward when you can. White Ripple." The barista, a college student named Jenny, was so moved by the gesture that she spent her break making white cards to give to customers throughout the day. By evening, she had given away 20 cards, along with free pastries, cookies, and upgraded drinks. Meanwhile, Harold had convinced his physical therapist to help him visit the cardiac unit at Chicago General, where he distributed white flowers to patients and their families, sharing his story and encouraging them to look for opportunities to spread kindness once they recovered. Within a week, something remarkable began to happen. Marcus started receiving messages on the simple website he had created for the White Ripple Project. A teacher wrote that she had received one of their cards when a stranger paid for her lunch, and she had inspired her entire class to do kind acts for each other. A businessman shared that getting a White Ripple card after someone held an elevator, for him, had motivated him to start volunteering at a homeless shelter. The project's growth was organic and grassroots. Marcus didn't advertise or promote it beyond creating simple white cards and a basic website where people could share their stories. He continued wearing white every day, now not just for his sister, but as a symbol of the hope and healing that kindness could bring to the world. 1 month after starting the project, Marcus was approached at work by his supervisor, Janet Kim. She had heard about his project from her daughter, who was Jenny's roommate at college. "Marcus," Janet said, "I know this is unusual, but I've been reading about your White Ripple project online. Our company has been looking for ways to give back to the community. Would you be interested in presenting this to our board of directors?" Marcus was stunned. He had never imagined that his simple idea would gain such attention. "I don't know anything about business presentations," he admitted. "That's okay," Janet smiled. "I'll help you prepare. What you've created is exactly the kind of positive community impact Sterling Insurance wants to support." The presentation to the board was scheduled for the following Friday. Marcus spent the week preparing, with help from Janet and encouragement from Harold, who insisted on being there for moral support despite his ongoing recovery. On the day of the presentation, Marcus stood before 12 executives in his perfectly pressed white shirt and white pants, more nervous than he had ever been in his life. He began by telling Harold's story, explaining how a chance encounter had led to a friendship and then to a movement based on Eleanor's simple belief in the power of kindness. "The White Ripple Project isn't about money or publicity," Marcus explained, his voice gaining confidence as he spoke. "It's about reminding people that small acts of kindness matter, that every person has the power to make someone else's day better, and that these small acts can create positive change in our communities." He showed them the website, which now had over 500 stories from people who had participated in the project. He shared photos of white cards being passed along in coffee shops, hospitals, schools, and businesses throughout Chicago. He explained that the project had cost him personally less than $200 in printing cards and maintaining a simple website, yet it had generated thousands of acts of kindness across the city. Board member Patricia Sullivan raised her hand. "Marcus, this is beautiful work, but what exactly are you asking from Sterling Insurance?" Marcus took a deep breath. He had rehearsed this moment with Harold. "I'm not asking for money," he said. "I'm asking for permission to invite our employees to participate. If Sterling Insurance endorsed the White Ripple Project as a company initiative, we could reach thousands more people. We could encourage our customers, our vendors, our partners to join the movement. We could show that business can be a force for kindness in the community." The room fell silent. Marcus wondered if he had overstepped, if his simple project was too small or naive for a corporate environment. Then board chairman Robert Sterling himself spoke up. "Mr. Thompson," he said slowly, "in 30 years of business, I've seen countless community outreach proposals. Most of them require significant financial investment with unclear returns. What you're proposing costs us almost nothing but has the potential to transform how people view our company and our industry. I think it's brilliant." The vote was unanimous. Sterling Insurance would become the first corporate sponsor of the White Ripple Project, encouraging all employees to participate and promoting the initiative to their customers and business partners. They would also provide resources for printing, cards, maintaining the website, and tracking the project's growth. As Marcus left the boardroom that day, his white shirt practically glowing in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the office windows, he called Harold with the news. The elderly man was so excited he could barely contain himself. "Eleanor would be so proud," Harold said, his voice thick with emotion. "A simple act of kindness has grown into something that could touch millions of lives." Marcus realized that Harold was right, but he also understood that this was just the beginning. The White Ripple Project was about to expand beyond anything he had imagined, and with that growth would come challenges, opportunities, and consequences that would test everything he believed about the power of kindness to change the world. 6 months after Sterling Insurance's endorsement, the White Ripple Project had exploded beyond Marcus's wildest dreams. What had started as a simple friendship between him and Harold had grown into a movement that was being covered by local news stations and had spread to over a dozen cities across the Midwest. Marcus found himself thrust into a role he had never expected, the reluctant leader of a kindness revolution. The project's success brought unexpected challenges. Marcus's simple website had crashed multiple times due to traffic, forcing Sterling Insurance to upgrade their hosting and assign a part-time web developer to manage the platform. The original white cards that Marcus had printed at a local copy shop were now being professionally produced in batches of 50,000, distributed through businesses, schools, and community organizations. More complicated was the media attention. Marcus had given his first television interview the previous month, appearing on Chicago Morning News in his signature white outfit. The segment, titled "The Man in White Who's Changing Chicago One Kindness at a Time," had gone viral on social media, bringing both praise and criticism that Marcus found overwhelming. Some people embraced the message wholeheartedly. Schools were incorporating White Ripple challenges into their curricula. Hospitals were training staff to participate in the project as part of patient care. Several other companies had followed Sterling Insurance's lead, making the White Ripple Project part of their corporate culture. But success also brought skeptics and critics. Online comments ranged from cynical, "This is just a marketing gimmick," to cruel, "What kind of attention-seeking weirdo wears white clothes every day?" Some questioned whether acts of kindness done as part of an organized project were truly genuine, arguing that real kindness should be spontaneous and private. Marcus struggled with these criticisms, particularly because some of them echoed his own doubts. Had his simple desire to honor his sister and help Harold become something too big, too commercial? Was he somehow corrupting the pure intention behind Eleanor's philosophy? These concerns weighed heavily on his mind as he prepared for what would become the most important day in the project's brief history. The mayor's office had contacted Sterling Insurance about featuring the White Ripple Project in Chicago's annual Community Heroes celebration. Marcus would be recognized alongside firefighters, teachers, and medical workers who had made significant contributions to the city. The night before the ceremony, Marcus sat in Harold's living room, sharing his anxieties with his friend while Buster slept peacefully on the rug between them. "I never wanted this to be about me," Marcus confessed. "I just wanted to do something good in Eleanor's memory and help people be kinder to each other. Now I'm being called a community hero, and I feel like a fraud. Harold, who had become much stronger over the months and had emerged as Marcus's closest advisor and biggest supporter, listened carefully before responding. "Marcus, do you remember what Eleanor wrote about the man who helped the old woman with groceries?" "That he didn't do it for recognition or praise," Marcus replied. "Exactly. But here's the important part. Eleanor was watching. His kindness was seen and appreciated, even though he didn't know it. The fact that you're getting recognition now doesn't change the pure intention you had when you started. It just means that more people are watching and hopefully more people are inspired to act." Harold paused, then continued with a gentle smile. "Besides, look at what's happening around us. The White Ripple Project isn't about you anymore. If it ever was, it's about thousands of people choosing to be kinder to each other every day. That's Eleanor's dream coming true." The Community Heroes ceremony was held in Millennium Park on a beautiful Saturday afternoon in October. Marcus wore his finest white shirt and pants, his appearance now familiar to many Chicago residents who had seen his interviews or participated in the project. As he sat on the stage waiting for his introduction, he looked out at the crowd and spotted dozens of people wearing white clothing in solidarity with the movement. When Mayor Patricia Gonzalez called his name, Marcus walked to the podium feeling humbled rather than proud. He had prepared remarks, but as he looked out at the sea of faces, he decided to speak from his heart instead. "7 months ago," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the microphone, "I helped a stranger who had collapsed on the sidewalk. I didn't help him because I'm a hero. I helped him because he needed help, and I was there. That stranger, Harold Cunningham, became my friend and taught me about his wife Eleanor's belief that kindness spreads like ripples in water." He paused, spotting Harold in the front row, beaming with pride and holding Buster on his lap. "The White Ripple Project isn't my achievement," Marcus continued. "It belongs to every person who has held a door, bought a stranger's coffee, visited someone in the hospital, or simply smiled at someone who looked like they needed it. It belongs to the teacher who uses kindness challenges in her classroom, to the business owner who pays his employees to volunteer, to the teenager who stands up for the kid being bullied." The crowd was completely silent, hanging on every word. "I wear white clothing every day to remind myself and others that hope, healing, and new beginnings are always possible. But the real power isn't in what I wear or what any one person does. The real power is in what we do together, in the choice we make every day to see each other's humanity and respond with kindness." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Marcus barely heard it. He was looking at Harold, who was wiping tears from his eyes and mouthing the words, "Eleanor would be so proud." After the ceremony, something remarkable happened. Instead of dispersing, much of the crowd remained in the park, organizing impromptu acts of kindness. People were buying food for homeless individuals, helping elderly attendees to their cars, sharing contact information to organize volunteer projects, and exchanging white ripple cards with personal messages of encouragement. A young girl named Sophia, probably about 8 years old, approached Marcus with her mother. She was wearing a white dress and carrying a small bouquet of white flowers. "Mr. Marcus," she said shyly, "my mom said you started the Kindness Project. These flowers are for you, but I want to give them to someone else instead. Is that okay?" Marcus knelt down to Sophia's level, touched by her thoughtfulness. "That's perfect, Sophia. Who do you want to give them to?" Sophia looked around the crowd and pointed to an elderly woman sitting alone on a bench, watching the festivities but not participating. She looks lonely." Together, Marcus and Sophia walked over to the woman, with Sophia's mother following behind. The little girl presented the flowers with a bright smile, explaining that they were from the White Ripple Project, and that she hoped they would make the woman's day better. The elderly woman, whose name was Ruth, began to cry as she accepted the flowers. She explained that she had recently moved to Chicago to be closer to her daughter, but didn't know anyone in the city yet. "I came to this event hoping to meet some people," she said, "but I was too shy to approach anyone." Within minutes, Sophia's simple act of kindness had connected Ruth with several other attendees who invited her to join their volunteer group and offered to show her around the neighborhood. Marcus watched this interaction unfold, realizing that this was exactly what Eleanor had envisioned. Kindness creating connections that ripple outward in ways no one could predict. As the afternoon wound down, Marcus found himself surrounded by local news crews wanting interviews, city officials discussing expansion plans, and business leaders proposing partnerships. The attention was flattering but overwhelming, and he began to feel anxious about the project's rapid growth. It was Harold who rescued him, approaching with Buster in his arms and a knowing look in his eyes. "I think it's time we went home," Harold said simply. "Buster needs his dinner, and I suspect you need some quiet time to process all of this." As they walked through the park together, Marcus realized that despite all the recognition and expansion, the most important thing about the White Ripple Project remained unchanged. It had brought him and Harold together as friends, and it continued to inspire simple human connections every day. The movement had grown beyond his control, but its heart remained pure. However, as they reached Harold's car, Marcus noticed a man in an expensive suit watching them from a distance, talking quietly, on his phone while taking photos with a long-lens camera. Something about the man's behavior made Marcus uncomfortable, though he couldn't explain why. Harold noticed Marcus's concern. "What is it?" he asked. "Probably nothing," Marcus replied, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the White Ripple Project's success had attracted attention that might not be entirely positive. Success, he was learning, came with complications he had never anticipated. 3 weeks after the Community Heroes ceremony, Marcus's worst fears about unwanted attention became reality. The man in the expensive suit turned out to be a private investigator hired by Thomas Brennan, a wealthy businessman who owned a chain of motivational speaking companies and self-help websites. Brennan had been watching the White Ripple Project's growth with increasing interest, seeing not a grassroots kindness movement, but a profitable brand opportunity. Marcus first learned about Brennan's interest when he received a certified letter at his apartment. The letter, written on expensive letterhead, was an offer to purchase the White Ripple Project for $2.5 million, including all trademarks, the website, social media accounts, and Marcus's exclusive services as a spokesperson for 5 years. Marcus stared at the letter in disbelief, reading it 3 times before calling Harold. Within an hour, Harold and Buster were at his apartment, both of them equally shocked by the proposition. "They want to buy the project?" Harold asked, adjusting his reading glasses to examine the contract. "But it's not for sale. It's not even yours to sell. It belongs to everyone who participates." "That's what I thought," Marcus agreed. "But apparently I was wrong. According to this lawyer, because I created the name, the website, and the original concept, I technically own the intellectual property rights. Brennan wants to turn it into a franchise operation." Harold read aloud from the contract. "The purchaser intends to develop the White Ripple concept into a comprehensive personal development and corporate training program, including seminars, workshops, merchandise, mobile applications, and book publications." Harold looked up with disgust. "They want to commercialize Eleanor's belief in simple human kindness." The offer letter included examples of Brennan's previous work. He had purchased several small charitable initiatives and transformed them into profitable enterprises. One had been a community garden project that became a line of expensive organic products. Another was a literacy program that became a subscription-based reading app with premium features. Marcus felt sick reading about these acquisitions. "Harold, what if I refuse? What if I just say no and keep the project as it is?" Harold pointed to a section near the end of the contract. Look at this clause here. If you refuse their offer, they're threatening to start a competing project called kindness, waves with similar goals and methods. They claim that since kindness itself can't be trademarked, they have the right to create their own version. The implications were devastating. Brennan's company had the resources to flood the market with a professional, well-funded version of the White Ripple Project. They could hire celebrities as spokespeople, create slick marketing campaigns, and potentially overshadow the grassroots movement that Marcus and Harold had nurtured so carefully. Over the next few days, Marcus agonized over the decision. He consulted with lawyers provided by Sterling Insurance, who confirmed that Brennan's legal position was solid. Marcus could refuse to sell, but he couldn't prevent a competitor from launching a similar project. The stress of the situation began affecting Marcus's daily life. For the first time since his sister's illness, he considered not wearing white to work. The clothing that had once symbolized hope and healing now felt like a target on his back, marking him as the public face of something that was being threatened by corporate greed. It was during this crisis that Marcus received an unexpected phone call that would change everything. The caller identified herself as Dr. Jennifer Wu, a professor of social psychology at Northwestern University. "Mr. Thompson," Dr. Wu said, "I've been following the White Ripple Project as part of my research on community-based social movements. I understand you're facing some challenges with commercialization attempts." Marcus was cautious. "How did you hear about that?" "Academic networks are surprisingly good at spreading information," Dr. Wu replied with a slight laugh. "But I'm calling because I believe I have a solution that could protect your project while also advancing important research on the psychology of kindness and social change." Dr. Wu explained that Northwestern University was seeking community partners for a new Center for Applied Compassion Research. The center would study how kindness initiatives like the White Ripple Project actually impact communities, measuring everything from mental health outcomes to economic effects to social cohesion. "If you were willing to partner with us," Dr. Wu continued, "we could help you establish the White Ripple Project as a formally protected research initiative. The university would provide legal protection, academic credibility, and resources for expansion while maintaining the project's grassroots nature and nonprofit status." Marcus was intrigued but wary. What would that mean for people who are already participating? Would they have to sign up for research studies? Not at all, Dr. Wu assured him. Participation in the kindness activities would remain exactly as it is now: voluntary, simple, and free. The research component would be separate, involving surveys and interviews with people who choose to participate in the academic study. Think of it as two parallel tracks. The community movement continues as it always has, while researchers study its effects to better understand how kindness spreads and impacts society. Marcus arranged to meet Dr. Wu and her team the following week. He brought Harold, who had become his unofficial advisor and closest friend throughout the project's growth. The meeting took place in a comfortable conference room at Northwestern, with Dr. Wu joined by two colleagues, Dr. Michael Santos, who studied community organizing, and Dr. Lisa Chen, an expert in nonprofit management. "Mr. Thompson," Dr. Santos began, "what you've created is remarkable from an academic perspective. Most top-down kindness initiatives fail because they feel artificial or forced. The White Ripple Project succeeded because it emerged organically from genuine human connection and maintained its authenticity as it grew." Dr. Chen added, "The university partnership would provide several layers of protection. First, it would establish the project as an academic research initiative, which makes it much harder for commercial entities to challenge or copy. Second, it would provide sustainable funding through grants and university resources. Third, it would give you access to expertise in areas like nonprofit law, organizational development, and program evaluation." Harold, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. "What guarantees do we have that the university won't eventually try to control or commercialize the project itself?" Dr. Wu nodded approvingly at the question. That's exactly the right concern to raise. We're proposing a formal partnership agreement that would establish Marcus as the permanent community director of the project with full autonomy over its operations and growth. The university would provide support and resources but would have no authority to change the project's mission, methods, or nonprofit status. She continued. Additionally, we're proposing to establish an advisory board that would include community representatives, people who have participated in the project from its early days. This board would have veto power over any major changes to ensure the project remains true to its grassroots origins. Marcus felt a spark of hope for the first time since receiving Brennan's offer. What about the immediate threat? If we take time to establish this partnership, what's to stop Brennan from launching his competing project? Dr. Santos smiled. Actually, we've already taken some preliminary steps. Northwestern's legal team has been in contact with Mr. Brennan's lawyers, informing them that the university is considering the White Ripple project for formal academic partnership. This has given them pause, as challenging a university-backed research initiative is much more complex and expensive than targeting an individual. The meeting continued for 2 hours, with the academics presenting detailed plans for how the partnership would work. They showed Marcus studies of similar collaborations between universities and community movements, demonstrating how academic support had helped preserve the authenticity and mission of grassroots initiatives while providing them with resources for sustainable growth. As they walked to their car after the meeting, Harold was enthusiastic. Marcus, this feels right. It's like Eleanor's vision is finding a way to protect itself and grow at the same time. Marcus agreed, but he also felt the weight of the decision. Partnering with Northwestern would fundamentally change the White Ripple project, even if the changes were intended to preserve its essential character. The simple idea that had emerged from a chance encounter on a Chicago sidewalk was becoming something much larger and more complex. That evening, Marcus sat in his apartment wearing his white pajamas. Even his sleepwear had become part of his commitment to his daily reminder of hope. He held Eleanor's journal, which Harold had given him months earlier, and reread her final entry about kindness rippling outward like waves in still water. As he read Eleanor's words again, Marcus realized that she had been right about kindness, being contagious. But she probably never imagined that it could become so contagious that it would need protection from those who wanted to profit from it. The decision he faced would determine not just the future of the White Ripple project, but the future of a movement that had touched thousands of lives and had the potential to reach millions more. Marcus picked up his phone and began typing a text message to Dr. Wu. After careful consideration and discussion with Harold, I would like to move forward with exploring the university partnership. When can we begin the formal process? He hesitated for a moment before hitting send, knowing that this decision would mark the beginning of a new chapter in a story that had started with nothing more than a man in white clothes helping a stranger in need. 1 year later, Marcus stood before the largest audience of his life in the auditorium at Northwestern University. The occasion was the first annual conference on applied compassion research, and over 800 people had gathered from around the world to hear about the White Ripple project and similar initiatives. Marcus wore his finest white suit, specially tailored for the event, but his nervousness was visible despite his professional appearance. The partnership with Northwestern had exceeded everyone's expectations. The White Ripple project had not only survived Thomas Brennan's commercial threats, but had flourished under academic protection. Brennan's company had attempted to launch their competing Kindness Waves initiative, but without the authentic, grassroots foundation that had made the original project successful. It had failed to gain traction and quietly disappeared after 6 months. Dr. Wu introduced Marcus to the international audience of researchers, community organizers, educators, and philanthropists. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to present Marcus Thompson, whose simple act of kindness on a Chicago sidewalk has grown into one of the most studied and successful community compassion initiatives in modern history. As Marcus approached, the podium, he caught sight of Harold sitting in the front row, now 74 years old but vibrant and healthy. Buster had passed away peacefully 6 months earlier, but Harold had adopted 2 rescue dogs from the local shelter and had become a passionate advocate for elderly pet adoption. Beside Harold sat Marcus's sister, Amelia, now cancer-free for over 4 years and working as a pediatric nurse at the same hospital where Harold had recovered. 3 years ago, Marcus began, his voice steady and clear, I had no idea that helping one person would lead to this moment. I certainly never imagined that my habit of wearing white clothes would become a symbol recognized around the world, or that academic researchers would be studying the psychological and social impacts of simple kindness. He clicked to his first slide showing a map of the world with white dots marking cities where White Ripple initiatives were active. Today, the White Ripple Project operates in 127 cities across 23 countries. We estimate that over 2.3 million individual acts of kindness have been documented through our platform, but the real number is certainly much higher because most participants don't report their activities. The audience was impressed by the scope, but Marcus quickly shifted focus to what the numbers meant in human terms. More importantly than the statistics are the stories. Like Maria Santos in São Paulo, Brazil, who started a White Ripple initiative in her favela that has reduced youth violence by 40% over 2 years. Or James Kim in Seoul, who adapted our model to address social isolation among elderly residents in his apartment complex. Marcus shared story after story of how the simple concept had been adapted to different cultures and communities while maintaining its core message of accessible daily kindness. In rural Kenya, participants left small white stones as symbols of completed kind acts. In Tokyo, office workers used white origami cranes to track their participation. In London, secondary school students had integrated White Ripple challenges into their citizenship curriculum. But perhaps the most surprising finding from our partnership with Northwestern, Marcus continued, has been the measurable impact on participants themselves. Dr. Wu's research team has documented significant improvements in mental health, life, satisfaction, and sense of community connection among regular White Ripple participants compared to control groups. Dr. Wu had presented these research findings earlier in the conference. Her 3-year longitudinal study had shown that people who committed to daily acts of kindness reported 23% lower levels of anxiety, 18% improvement in self-reported happiness, and were 31% more likely to feel connected to their communities, compared to non-participants. Marcus clicked to a slide showing Eleanor's original journal entry, now translated into dozens of languages and displayed in community centers around the world. None of this success would have been possible without the wisdom of Eleanor Cunningham, whose final thoughts about kindness rippling outward continue to inspire millions of people she never met. He paused, looking directly at Harold, who was wiping tears from his eyes. Eleanor believed that kindness is contagious, and she was right. But what she couldn't have known is that in our connected world, kindness can become pandemic in the best possible sense, spreading rapidly across continents and cultures, creating positive change on a scale she never could have imagined. Marcus then shared the most significant announcement of the conference. Today, I'm honored to announce that the White Ripple Project has been selected as a pilot program for the United Nations' new Global Compassion Initiative. Working with UN representatives and local organizations, we will be establishing White Ripple programs in refugee camps, post-conflict regions, and areas affected by natural disasters. The audience erupted in applause, but Marcus raised his hand for quiet. He had one more important point to make. This growth and recognition is overwhelming and humbling, he said. But I want to remind everyone here that the White Ripple Project's power has never been in its size or scope. Its power has always been in its simplicity and accessibility. Every person in this auditorium can participate meaningfully by doing one small act of kindness today. The mother of 2 children sitting in row 5 can participate just as fully as the CEO of a multinational corporation in row 12. Marcus gestured to his white clothing. I've been asked countless times why I continue to wear white every day, especially now that the project has grown beyond anything I could personally manage. The answer is that these clothes remind me every morning when I get dressed that today I have the opportunity to bring hope, healing, or help to someone who needs it. They remind me that I am not just the founder of a movement. I am a participant, just like everyone else. As he concluded his speech, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that Tuesday morning when he had knelt beside Harold on a Chicago sidewalk. He was now considered an expert on community organizing and social psychology, despite never having studied either subject formally. He had been featured on magazine covers, invited to speak at conferences around the world, and consulted with governments about implementing kindness initiatives. But as he looked out at the audience of researchers and activists, Marcus realized that the most important changes in his life were personal. His friendship with Harold had taught him the value of intergenerational relationships. His sister's recovery and career choice had shown him how surviving hardship could inspire service to others. His daily practice of kindness had connected him with his community in ways he had never experienced before. After the conference, Marcus, Harold, and Amelia went to dinner at a quiet restaurant near the university. As they sat together, Marcus felt profound gratitude for the unexpected turns his life had taken. You know, Harold said, raising a glass of wine, Eleanor would have been amazed by everything that's happened. But I think what would have made her happiest is seeing how the project stayed true to her original vision despite all the success and attention. Amelia, who had become close friends with Harold over the past year, nodded in agreement. What I find remarkable is that Marcus never let the recognition change who he is. He's still the same person who wore white clothes to give me hope during my treatment, just with a much bigger platform to spread that hope. Marcus felt embarrassed by the praise, but also deeply moved. I think the real miracle is that something so simple, just being kind to strangers, has resonated with so many people around the world. It makes me believe that despite all the division and conflict we see in the news, most people fundamentally want to be good to each other. As they walked through the university campus after dinner, Marcus reflected on Eleanor's metaphor about kindness creating ripples in still water. The White Ripple Project had indeed created ripples that had spread far beyond what anyone could have imagined. But the most important ripples were often the smallest and most personal ones. The friendship between him and Harold, the hope his white clothing had given his sister, the daily moments of connection between strangers who chose to be kind to each other. 3 years after helping a stranger on a sidewalk, Marcus Thompson had become an internationally recognized advocate for compassion and community building. But every morning, as he put on his white shirt and looked at himself in the mirror, he was reminded that his most important role was simply to be ready for whatever opportunity to help others might present itself that day. The man who wore white had indeed done something that left people speechless. He had proven that one person's commitment to daily kindness could create a global movement that would touch millions of lives. But perhaps even more remarkably, he had shown that success and recognition didn't have to corrupt the pure intention that had started it all. In a world often cynical about human nature and suspicious of good intentions, Marcus Thompson and the White Ripple Project had become living proof that kindness truly is contagious, and that ordinary people can create extraordinary change simply by choosing to care about the welfare of strangers.